The evening sun was setting over Pine Grove City as Officer Richard Thompson drummed his fingers impatiently on his patrol car's steering wheel. It had been a long, frustrating day filled with paperwork and petty complaints. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, and the new chief's strict policies were getting under his skin. He just wanted to finish his shift and head home. That's when he spotted a silver Honda Civic with a flickering taillight making a right turn onto Maple Street. Thompson's mood shifted. Finally, something to do. He flipped on his lights and followed the car, watching as it pulled over perfectly into a nearby parking lot. Too perfectly, he thought to himself. These by-the-book drivers always irritated him the most. Behind the wheel sat a teenage girl, probably around 17, wearing a volunteer's uniform from the local children's hospital. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she watched Thompson approach in her side mirror. The sun caught her hospital volunteer badge, which read Amy. License and registration, Thompson barked, not even bothering with a greeting. The girl's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her documents. Sir, I'm really sorry about the taillight. I just noticed it today and was planning to get it fixed tomorrow after my volunteer shift. Thompson ignored her explanation, snatching the documents from her outstretched hand. Andy Lynn, the license read. He checked his watch theatrically, making sure she could see the gesture. Step out of the vehicle, he commanded. But sir, I'm already running late for my shift at the children's hospital. There are kids waiting for. I said, step out of the vehicle. Thompson's voice carried an edge that made Amy flinch. Or would you prefer I call for backup? The girl slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, hugging her arms against the evening chill. Thompson made a show of examining her car from every angle, taking his time, occasionally making disapproving noises. Other cars drove past slowly, their drivers watching the scene unfold. You know, Thompson said, circling back to where Amy stood shivering, I'm seeing quite a few violations here. Tint looks a little dark. That parking tag is obstructing your view. And is that a scratch on your bumper? Sir, please. Amy's voice quivered. The children, they're waiting for me to read to them. It's their favorite part of the week. Should have thought about that before driving an unsafe vehicle, Thompson retorted, pulling out his citation book with exaggerated slowness. Now, let's see what we have here. He began writing, making sure to take his time with each letter. The sun had nearly set now, and the temperature was dropping. Annie checked her phone anxiously. No signal in this part of town. She couldn't even call the hospital to let them know she'd be late. Sir, she tried one more time, my father always taught me to respect police officers. He says you have one of the most important jobs in the world. Please just tell me what I need to fix, and I promise I'll take care of it first thing tomorrow. Thompson paused for a moment, pen hovering over his citation book. Something about the way she spoke about her father made him hesitate. But then he remembered his own rough day, the cold coffee, the endless paperwork, and his irritation returned full force. Your father should have also taught you to maintain your vehicle properly, he sneered, returning to his writing. This could take a while. Hope those kids aren't too disappointed. As tears welled up in Amy's eyes, Thompson felt a familiar sense of satisfaction. He'd show everyone that no one, not even a goody-two-shoes hospital volunteer, was above the law. Little did he know, this routine traffic stop was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. In the growing darkness, as Amy stood helplessly by her car, several more patrol cars cruised past the scene. Their occupants gave Thompson knowing looks. They'd seen this behavior from him before. But tonight was different. Tonight, he'd picked the wrong person to bully, and soon he would learn just how serious the consequences could be. The parking lot had grown dark, and the evening air was getting colder by the minute. Amy stood shivering next to her car, watching helplessly as Officer Thompson took his time writing up citation after citation. Her phone showed 6:45 p.m. She was already 45 minutes late for her volunteer shift at the children's hospital. Please, Officer Thompson, she tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. The kids in the cancer ward, they wait all week for story time. Some of them don't have many things to look forward to. Thompson looked up from his citation book, a cold smile playing on his lips. Maybe this will teach you a valuable lesson about vehicle maintenance. He made a show of examining her perfectly maintained car again. You know, I could have the car towed for inspection. These violations seem pretty serious. Amy's heart sank. She thought about little Tommy in the cancer ward, who always saved her a spot next to his bed, and Jenny, who loved to act out the different character voices with her. They would be wondering where she was. "I can call for a tow truck," Thompson continued, reaching for his radio. "Of course, at this hour, it might take them an hour or two to get here. Plus, you'll have to pay the impound fees." "No, please." Amy's voice cracked. "My mom just got laid off from her job. We can't afford any extra expenses right now." She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out her volunteer ID card. "Look, I can prove I'm really a hospital volunteer. You can call them to verify." Thompson took the ID card and made a great show of examining it under his flashlight. Well, looks like someone thinks their volunteer work puts them above the law." He pocketed the ID. "I'll need to verify this is real. Could be a fake, you know." A few cars drove past slowly, their drivers watching the scene with concern. One elderly couple even slowed down completely, but Thompson waved them along aggressively. Andy watched them drive away, feeling more alone than ever. "Now," Thompson said, turning back to his citation book, "let's talk about that air freshener hanging from your rearview mirror." "That's another violation right there, obstruction of view." Amy glanced at the tiny pine tree air freshener her little sister had given her for her birthday. It was barely larger than a credit card. "But sir, it's so small, and I've never had any problems with it before." "Are you telling me how to do my job?" Thompson's voice took on a dangerous edge. He ripped the air freshener down and tossed it into a nearby trash can. "There, I just did you a favor. One less citation to write up." The cold was really biting now, and Annie couldn't stop her teeth from chattering. She thought about texting her father, but didn't dare reach for her phone. Officer Thompson seemed to be looking for any excuse to pile on more violations. A hospital newsletter fell out of her volunteered folder, catching Thompson's eye. The headline read, "Children's Ward Celebrates Record Recovery Rates." There was a photo of smiling kids gathered around a volunteer reading a story. For a brief moment, something flickered across Thompson's face. Was it doubt? Guilt? But then his expression hardened again. "You kids these days," he muttered, scribbling another citation. "Always thinking you're special, that the rules don't apply to you. Well, guess what? They do." Tears were flowing freely down Amy's cheeks now, but she stood straight and composed, just like her father had taught her. "My father always says that true authority comes from helping people, not hurting them," she said quietly. Thompson's pen paused mid-sentence. Something about the way she spoke about her father, again, made him uncomfortable. But he pushed the feeling aside and continued writing. "Your father sounds like a real philosopher," he sneered. "Maybe he should teach a class on traffic laws while he's at it." Just then, Thompson's radio crackled to life. The dispatcher's voice came through, asking for his location and status. He stepped away to respond, leaving Amy standing in the cold, staring at the growing stack of citations on his clipboard. A light breeze carried the sound of children's laughter from the nearby hospital. Andy closed her eyes, fighting back fresh tears. She had never missed a volunteer shift before. The kids would be so disappointed. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, her father was just finishing up a meeting that would change everything. And tomorrow morning, Officer Thompson would learn exactly who he had chosen to torment on this cold evening. The dispatcher's voice crackled through again. "All units be advised, new department leadership starting tomorrow. Mandatory briefing at 800 hours. Thompson barely registered the message as he returned to his task, determined to make this traffic stop last as long as possible. Some lessons, he thought to himself, had to be taught the hard way. Little did he know, he would be the one learning a harsh lesson very soon. Officer Thompson strolled into the police station the next morning, coffee in hand, wearing his usual smug expression. He'd arrived early for the mandatory briefing, hoping to snag his favorite seat in the back row. The morning sun streamed through the windows, highlighting the fresh polish on his badge. The same badge he'd used to intimidate so many innocent civilians. The station was buzzing with unusual activity. Officers hurried about, straightening their uniforms and checking their appearance in any reflective surface they could find. Thompson overheard snippets of conversation about the new police commissioner, but he wasn't particularly interested. Changes in leadership rarely affected officers on regular patrol duty like himself. "Hey, did you hear about the new boss?" Officer Wilson whispered as Thompson settled into his chair. They said he's some hotshot from downtown, cleaned up one of the toughest precincts in the city. Thompson shrugged, taking a long sip of his coffee. Another suit with big ideas. Give him a month, he'll be buried in paperwork just like the rest of them. The briefing room gradually filled with officers, an air of anticipation building. Thompson noticed several higher-ranking officials he'd never seen before standing near the podium. Their serious expressions and formal postures suggested this wasn't going to be a typical morning briefing. The room fell silent as Chief Roberts stepped up to the podium. "Good morning, officers. Today marks a new chapter for our precinct. Please welcome your new police commissioner, Robert Lynn." Thompson's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. Lynn. The name triggered a memory from last night. The teenage girl's driver's license. But it couldn't be. A tall, distinguished-looking man in an impeccable uniform walked to the podium. Commissioner Lynn carried himself with quiet authority, his eyes scanning the room as he began to speak. "Thank you, Chief Roberts. I'm looking forward to working with each of you to serve our community better." Thompson's stomach churned as he studied the commissioner's features. They were strikingly familiar. The same determined set of the jaw, the same dignified bearing he'd seen in the young volunteer the night before. The commissioner continued his speech, outlining his vision for the department. "My first priority is rebuilding trust between our officers and the community we serve. Every interaction between an officer and a citizen is an opportunity to either strengthen or damage that trust." Just then, the briefing room door opened quietly. Thompson's blood ran cold as he watched Amy Lynn, still in her volunteer uniform from an early morning hospital shift, slip into the room. She carried a paper bag that probably contained her father's forgotten lunch. Commissioner Lynn's face lit up at the sight of his daughter. "Ah, perfect timing. Officers, this is my daughter Amy, who volunteers at our children's hospital. She exemplifies the kind of community service and dedication we should all strive to support." The color drained from Thompson's face as Amy's eyes met his. There was no hatred in her gaze, no triumph, only a quiet dignity that made him shrink in his seat. She hadn't mentioned her father's name last night, he realized. She hadn't tried to use her father's position to avoid the citations. She had simply stood there in the cold, accepting his abuse while knowing exactly who she was. "Amy has been volunteering at the Children's Hospital for 2 years now," Commissioner Lynn continued proudly. "In fact, just last night she was supposed to read to the kids in the cancer ward, but unfortunately she was delayed by—" His voice trailed off as Amy whispered something in his ear. Thompson watched in horror as the commissioner's expression shifted. The proud father disappeared, replaced by the stern leader of law enforcement. Lynn's eyes scanned the room again, this time stopping directly on Thompson. "Officer Thompson," Commissioner Lynn's voice cut through the silence. "Please remain after the briefing. We need to discuss an incident from last night." The other officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some glancing at Thompson with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. His years of bullying hadn't gone unnoticed by his colleagues. As the briefing continued, Thompson sat paralyzed in his chair, his coffee now cold and forgotten. Every word of the commissioner's speech about accountability, community trust, and ethical policing felt like a personal indictment. Amy had quietly taken a seat in the corner, her presence a silent testament to everything Thompson had done wrong. He remembered her words from the night before, "True authority comes from helping people, not hurting them." Now he understood, she hadn't been quoting some vague philosophy, but the very man who was about to decide his fate. The briefing room clock ticked loudly, counting down the minutes until Thompson would have to face the consequences of his actions. He thought about all the other innocent people he'd bullied over the years, wondering how many more Amy Lynns were out there, quietly bearing his cruelty while carrying their own untold stories. As Commissioner Lynn wrapped up his speech about the department's new direction, Thompson realized with crushing clarity that his days of unchecked authority were over. The badge he used to intimidate others would now be the very thing that held him accountable. One afternoon, as Thompson walked to his car, he passed the community bulletin board. A new poster caught his eye. It announced a children's hospital fundraiser, with a photo of volunteers reading to smiling kids. In the background, he could see Amy, her kind expression capturing exactly what public service was supposed to be about. The investigation was nearing its conclusion. Thompson's personnel file had grown thick with documented incidents, each one revealing a pattern of behavior that couldn't be ignored. His years of intimidating innocent people had finally caught up with him. Lieutenant Rogers sat across from Thompson in the interview room, sliding another statement across the table. "We have testimony from Officer Wilson about an incident last summer," she said quietly. "A young mother late for her child's doctor's appointment. Do you remember that one?" Thompson stayed at his hands, remembering the woman's tears as he deliberately delayed her, ignoring her pleas about her sick child. At the time, he'd felt powerful. Now, he just felt ashamed. In the commissioner's office, the investigation team presented their findings. Commissioner Lin listened carefully, his face showing no emotion as they detailed the years of misconduct. Though he'd stepped back from directly handling the case, his presence served as a reminder of the department's new direction. "The evidence is conclusive," the lead investigator concluded. "Officer Thompson's actions show a clear pattern of abuse of power spanning several years. The question now is, what message do we want to send to the department and the community?" As the sun set over the police station, casting long shadows through the windows, the weight of Thompson's actions hung heavy in the air. The investigation had revealed not just one night's misconduct, but years of damaged trust between an officer and his community. The time had come for accountability, and no badge could shield him from the truth any longer. Officer Thompson sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by newspaper clippings about his misconduct that had somehow made their way to the local press. The morning sun filtered through his blinds, casting striped shadows across the headlines. "Officer under investigation. Pattern of power abuse revealed. Community trust broken." His phone buzzed constantly with messages from fellow officers, some offering sympathy, others distancing themselves. He ignored them all. Instead, he stared at the latest email from Internal Affairs, scheduling his disciplinary hearing for next week. At the station, the mood had shifted dramatically. Officers who once laughed at Thompson's tough cop stories now shared different memories. Officer Baker remembered the time Thompson had made a pregnant woman stand in the rain while writing her a ticket for a burned-out license plate light. "I should have said something," Baker confided to his partner during their patrol. "We all should have. Maybe if we had spoken up sooner, things would be different." The evidence against Thompson had grown into an overwhelming pile. Lieutenant Rogers sat at her desk, reviewing dashboard camera footage that showed a clear pattern. In one video, Thompson could be seen making an elderly man do a field sobriety test, despite the man's cane and obvious physical limitations. In another, he forced a college student to empty her entire backpack onto a wet sidewalk, claiming he smelled something suspicious. "It's not just about Amy Lynn anymore," Rogers explained to her team. "This is about every person who felt helpless against an officer who abused his power." Thompson tried desperately to defend himself. He hired a lawyer who advised him to apologize and show remorse. But when he sat down to write his statement, the words felt hollow. How could he explain years of deliberately humiliating people who were just trying to go about their lives? In the break room, Officer Wilson found an old photo from the police academy graduation. Thompson stood in the front row, young and proud, hand over his heart as he took the oath to protect and serve. What happened to that guy? Wilson wondered aloud, showing the photo to his colleagues. The day of the hearing arrived with a heavy atmosphere. Thompson walked into the station, noticing how conversations stopped when he passed. The same officers who once laughed at his cruel jokes now looked away, embarrassed by their own silence over the years. Inside the hearing room, the evidence mounted. One by one, witnesses came forward. A school bus driver described how Thompson had detained him for a suspicious turn signal, making 40 children late for school. A nurse recalled being threatened with arrest for parking slightly over a line while rushing to an emergency shift. "Officer Thompson," the review board chairperson began, "how do you explain these incidents?" Thompson cleared his throat, adjusting his collar that suddenly felt too tight. "I was just being thorough," he started, but his voice trailed off as he saw Amy Lynn quietly enter the room with a stack of papers. She walked to the front and placed the papers on the review board's table. "These are letters," she explained softly, "from children at the hospital who missed their story time that night. They were worried about me when I didn't show up." The room fell silent as the board members read through the letters, written in crayon and decorated with children's drawings. One stood out, a picture of a sad face with the words, "We missed you, Ms. Emmy," written in wobbly letters. Thompson felt something break inside him. These weren't just faceless violations anymore. Each person he'd bullied had a story, had people waiting for them, had lives he'd disrupted for no reason other than to feel powerful. As the hearing continued, more officers came forward with their own observations. Officer Martinez described how she'd once seen Thompson laugh after reducing a young mother to tears. Officer Chen recalled how he'd bragged about making people late for job interviews. In his final statement, Thompson tried one last time to justify his actions. "I was just trying to maintain order," he said, but the words sounded false even to his own ears. The review board's expressions showed they weren't buying it either. Outside the hearing room, the station buzzed with activity. Young officers gathered around veteran cops who shared stories about what good policing really meant: helping people, building trust, serving the community. Commissioner Lin had kept his distance from the proceedings to ensure fairness, but his influence was felt throughout the station. Photos of community outreach programs and successful police-community partnerships had replaced the old tough on crime posters on the bulletin boards. As the sun set on the final day of the hearing, Thompson stood before the review board one last time. The weight of his actions, documented in countless testimonies and videos, hung heavy in the air. His badge, once a symbol of authority he'd wielded so carelessly, now felt like it was burning a hole in his chest. The time had come for accountability, and no amount of excuses could shield him from the truth any longer. His reckoning wasn't just about one night with Amy Lynn. It was about every person he'd wronged, every trust he'd broken, and every oath he'd forgotten along the way. The morning of the final decision dawned clear and bright. Officer Thompson stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his uniform one last time. His hands trembled slightly as he pinned on his badge, wondering if this would be the last time he'd wear it. The police station was unusually quiet as he walked through the doors. Officers moved about their duties in hushed tones, all aware that today would set a precedent for the entire department. The review board had spent a week deliberating after the hearing, considering every piece of evidence and testimony. In the waiting area outside the conference room, Thompson sat alone. Through the window, he could see the community park where he used to patrol. A group of kids played basketball while an elderly couple walked their dog, the same kind of ordinary citizens he'd terrorized for years. Officer Thompson called a stern voice. Lieutenant Rogers stood in the doorway. "The board is ready." Inside the conference room, 7 senior officers sat behind a long table. Their faces were serious, their postures rigid. Years of police work had taught them the weight of moments like these. At the center sat Chief Roberts, a folder placed precisely in front of him. "Officer Richard Thompson," Chief Roberts began, his voice echoing in the silent room. "This board has reviewed extensive evidence regarding your conduct as a police officer. The findings are," he paused, looking directly at Thompson. "Well, I think you know what we found." Thompson's throat went dry as Chief Roberts opened the folder. Behind him, he could hear more people entering the room. He didn't need to turn around to know that other officers were filing in to witness this moment. "Your dashboard camera footage alone revealed 57 incidents of misconduct in the past year," Chief Roberts continued. 57 times you chose to abuse your authority rather than protect and serve." The chief picked up a stack of papers. "We have statements from 32 citizens who experienced unnecessary harassment. 19 fellow officers have testified about witnessing your inappropriate behavior. And then there's the incident with Ms. Lynn." A soft murmur went through the room at the mention of Amy's name. Thompson stared at his shoes, remembering the cold night he kept her standing in the parking lot. "What's most troubling," Chief Roberts said, "is that none of these incidents were about enforcing the law. They were about power, about making people feel small so you could feel big." Thompson opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? The evidence was overwhelming. "This department exists to protect our community," Chief Roberts continued. "Every time you abuse your authority, you didn't just hurt individual citizens, you damaged the trust between police and the people we serve. That trust takes years to build and moments to destroy." Through the window, Thompson could see Emmy walking into the children's hospital across the street, her volunteer badge catching the morning sun. She was carrying a stack of books, clearly heading to another storytime session with the kids. "The board's decision is unanimous," Chief Roberts announced. "Officer Richard Thompson, you are hereby relieved of duty. Your badge and service weapon will be surrendered immediately. Your pension rights are revoked due to the severity and pattern of misconduct." The words hit Thompson like physical blows. 15 years of service ended, but as he reached up to remove his badge, he felt something unexpected: relief. The weight of his years of cruelty lifted slightly. Furthermore, Chief Roberts added, "We will be forwarding our findings to the District Attorney's Office for review. They will determine if criminal charges are warranted for civil rights violations." Officer Martinez, who had testified about Thompson's misconduct, watched from the back of the room. Her rookie partner whispered, "Was this really necessary? Couldn't they just have suspended him?" Martinez shook her head. "This isn't just about punishment," she whispered back. "It's about showing every officer and every citizen that the badge means something. That power comes with responsibility." As Thompson placed his badge on the table, Chief Roberts stood up. "Let this serve as a reminder to every officer in this department. Our authority comes from the trust of our community. When we break that trust, we break everything that makes our job possible." The room remained silent as Thompson walked out, head bowed. As he passed the bulletin board, he noticed a new poster: "Community First, Serve with Honor." Below it was a photo of officers reading to children at the hospital, the kind of service he should have been providing all along. Outside, the sun felt too bright, the street too wide. Without his badge, Thompson felt exposed, vulnerable, perhaps like all those people he'd made feel small over the years. A patrol car drove past, the officer inside giving him a solemn nod. The wheel had turned, and justice, in its own way, had been served. Back inside, Chief Roberts addressed the remaining officers. "Today marks a new chapter for our department. Let's make sure we learn from this. Every interaction with the public is a chance to build trust or break it. Choose wisely." As the room cleared out, Officer Wilson found Thompson's old academy graduation photo in his desk. The young man in the picture smiled proudly, full of promise and purpose. Wilson pinned it to the bulletin board as a reminder, not of Thompson's fall, but of how important it was to stay true to their oath to protect and serve. 6 months had passed since Thompson's dismissal, and the police department had undergone a remarkable transformation. The morning sun streamed through the newly installed glass doors of the station's Community Outreach Center, where Officer Martinez was helping a group of elderly residents file police reports. "Thank you for being so patient with us," an old gentleman said, his weathered hands clutching his cane. "It's nice to feel heard." Martinez smiled, remembering how different things used to be. Under Commissioner Lin's leadership, the department had embraced a new approach to community policing that was changing everything. At the children's hospital across town, Amy's volunteer program had grown into something extraordinary. She'd helped create a books and badges program where officers spent time reading to young patients. The sight of uniformed officers sitting in tiny chairs, doing funny voices for story time, had become a regular occurrence. "Look who's here!" A small voice called out as Officer Wilson entered the cancer ward, carrying a colorful storybook. The kids' faces lit up, a far cry from the fear that many of them once felt around police officers. Back at the station, the changes were visible everywhere. The old zero-tolerance posters had been replaced with community partnership initiatives. The break room bulletin board now displayed thank you cards from citizens and photos of officers helping at local events. Commissioner Lin stood in his office, looking out at the city he'd sworn to protect. On his desk lay the latest community satisfaction survey. Approval ratings had soared. But more importantly, people were starting to trust their police officers again. "Sir," his secretary called from the door, "the new training program statistics are in." The commissioner smiled as he reviewed the numbers. Complaints against officers had dropped by 70%. The new de-escalation training, community engagement requirements, and accountability measures were showing real results. In the briefing room, rookie officers gathered for their morning meeting. Officer Baker, now a training instructor, pointed to a screen showing body camera footage. "This is how we build trust," he explained, playing a clip of an officer helping a stranded motorist change a tire in the rain. Every interaction is an opportunity to show what we stand for. Across town, at a small coffee shop, former Officer Thompson sat alone, reading the morning paper. An article caught his eye. Local police department sets new standard for community relations. His hands trembled slightly as he read about the positive changes happening at his old workplace. The bell above the shop door chimed, and Annie walked in with a stack of children's books. She noticed Thompson but showed no anger, offering a small nod instead. Her father's words about forgiveness and growth had taken root. "The usual, Ms. Lynn?" the barista asked cheerfully. "Heading to the hospital for story time?" "Yes, but today's special," Annie replied with a smile. "We're starting a new program where older patients mentor the younger ones, teaching them that their circumstances don't define them." Thompson listened, remembering the night he kept her from these same children. The weight of his past actions still haunted him, but hearing about the positive changes somehow made it more bearable. At the academy across town, a new class of recruits stood at attention. Chief Roberts addressed them, his voice firm but encouraging. "Your badge is not a shield to hide behind," he told them. "It's a symbol of the community's trust. Every day, you must earn that trust anew." The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Officer Martinez patrolled the same parking lot where Thompson had harassed Amy months ago. She spotted a young mother struggling with grocery bags while trying to buckle her child into a car seat. "Need a hand?" Martinez asked, approaching with a warm smile. The mother's initial tension melted away as Martinez helped her load the groceries, even making silly faces at the giggling toddler. Back at the station, Commissioner Lynn reviewed applications for the department's new Community Advisory Board. Citizens from all walks of life had volunteered to help shape police policies and training. "This is real change," he told his staff, "not just in procedures, but in hearts and minds." As evening fell, Annie finished her hospital shift and walked through the park. She passed two officers playing basketball with local teenagers, their patrol car parked nearby with the lights creating a welcoming glow. The night shift officers gathered for their briefing, and Lieutenant Rogers shared a simple message: "Remember, we're not just enforcing laws. We're building bridges, one interaction at a time." In his apartment, Thompson watched the city lights flicker on. His old badge sat in a drawer, a reminder of power misused. But through his window, he could see police cars patrolling with a different energy now, not intimidating, but protecting. Not forcing compliance, but earning respect. The transformation wasn't just about new policies or programs. It was about remembering the true meaning of protect and serve. And somewhere in the city, a child was falling asleep in a hospital bed, smiling about the story a kind police officer had read to them that day.